All right. What's up, Parkour Gym owners? It's me, Jimmy Davidson.
And I'm Christopher Hollingsworth.
We got a little microphone set up today over here at Chez de la Chris, and we just put out a blog article all about communication, why it's critical in kind of any business, but in the context of a parkour gym. And it's like such a fundamentally important piece to get down right as a leader, as a leader mentoring people on their team, coaching people on their team, and just working with staff members. There's like some particular pieces of communication that can make or break your business, make or break you as a leader, or make or break your managers to their team. And we want to just dive all the way into that. So this conversation that Chris and I are about to have it accompanies an article that Chris put together today. So if you're a reader, definitely dive into that. It's something you can share with your team. This will give you a solid overview of those concepts as well. All right, so let's jump into it. Chris, let's tell them what are we talking about, and then let's get into it.
Yeah, so a little bit more about this topic and why it's important is if you find yourself in a leadership position within a business, either a general manager or a head coach, specifically within parkour, but really any position where you're managing people or working with people, you can't just rely on the systems and documents and procedures of the gym to run the business. There's always going to be situations that come up with your staff, with your parents that you're interacting with, the kids that you're interacting with, the general community, your property managers, and you're dealing with human beings. And so anytime you're dealing with human beings, you could have the best documentation, you could have the most amazing standard operating procedures, you could have all of the training in the world as a parkour coach or as a general manager, but none of that may make any difference if you don't know how to regulate your internal state, your emotions, or be with someone while they're angry, or lean into a high-stakes conversation that you've been avoiding that eventually leads to a large dysfunction within the team. So a little bit more about that is just you want to really be interested, if you're in a leadership position, in developing these communication skills. So, really the next key piece that we would get into here is talking about, well, what are the different types of communication that you would interact with as a leader in a gym? What are the specific things that you would really want to watch out for? So I'm curious for you as a business owner, to put you on the spot. Can you think of an example of something that you handled as a leader with your team, and it could have to do with anything within their accountability? Can you think of any example where someone came to you and you resolved that issue with them, something like that?
I can definitely think of a lot of the opposite of that came to me and resolved an issue. But yeah, I mean, using communication to resolve an issue that comes, a lot of the times we will find an issue that is sort of revealed. Like we found it by either not hitting our results, or we found it because we like accidentally upset a member or something. Yeah. So issue is revealed, and communication is the way that we investigate it. It's the way that we identify, okay, well, whose accountability is this? It's yours and yours. Okay, now like how do we talk about the work to be done and what needs to go into that to create a better result in the future, in a way that the person I'm speaking to doesn't take it personally, doesn't take it as an attack on them. And we are just talking about like what is so in the business, what needs to happen, what went wrong, what caused the going wrong, and how can we just like manage us having a better result, right? So a specific example, let's say, I think around that open house that we did, that first one where we ran an open house. We'd run quite a few open houses, and that's an event where we have a bunch of people come and they take little mini parkour lessons, and ideally at the end they sign up. And this one month we had each location, we have 3 locations, had its own open house. One of the open houses crushed it. The other 2 did not. And so that was like an, uh-oh, what happened there? And we had to investigate that, which we did. And that entire resolution was in communication, like figuring out what happened, what didn't happen, how do we plan for this in the future, who does specifically what, and then the next month we crushed it. So now we resolved it. So that was like fully resolved via communication.
Yeah. That's a perfect example. And you can hear in Jimmy's example of our open house, that's an example of what it looks like when communication is already established well. And you can have what Jimmy was pointing to, which is you can have those radical candor conversations about performance where you can just talk about what's so. And as a leader, man, when I'm talking about performance with this other leader, they're not taking it personally. They're not thinking, oh, Jimmy doesn't like me because we're talking about how we failed at this open house. They're thinking, oh, yeah, Jimmy's leaning in and discussing what the source of my ineffectiveness is as a leader. And the reason why we can have those conversations at the level that we can is because we've done a lot of the work that I'm talking about right here. So for anyone listening, some of the conversations that you want to begin having with your staff, and you want to be on the lookout for them, you specifically don't want to avoid these three things. And the first one is anything that has high stakes. So that could be related to an employee's performance, like a coach's performance or the performance of an event, like we were just talking about. If there's something on the line, then you want to have a conversation about it. Maybe it's about a pay raise. Maybe it's about you've had a conversation with a coach about some sort of behavioral change that you'd like to see with them. There's something at stake. That is an indication that a conversation needs to be had with that person from a leadership position. The second indication that you want to have a conversation with someone, you want to lean in, you don't want to avoid it, is if you know that there's a differing opinion about something. Something that Jimmy and I have leaned into within Freedom in Motion is ensuring that we actually have a process where we collect any differing opinions first from all relevant parties, all impacted parties for any decisions that are made with policies or things that are changing in the company so that we can get that feedback, find out if there are any differing opinions and address them head on in one-on-one conversations or with relevant groups. So that way we're not just ignoring, oh, here's my opinion, here's how I think things should run as, the CEO or the COO. Let's just ignore how everyone else feels about it and make this decision. That's not how you want to operate. You definitely want to be aware of, are there any differing opinions to the policy that I'm attempting to implement or the change I'm making within this business? And if there are, make sure that you discuss them. You don't need total 100% alignment to make difficult decisions or decisions that forward your company, but you do need to lean in and address, do these exist and where are they coming from and how relevant are they, and have I explored and considered these differing opinions? And I could write a book about why it's important to do that for your culture, to make sure everyone feels seen and valued and heard. But I won't. There are other people that have. But that's the second big thing. So we have the first one, which is high stakes, and we have the second one, which is differing opinions. And our third aspect that you really want to watch for is any time that there's a strong emotion. So you're dealing with people. In a business, you're always dealing with people. And anytime from your staff to your customers to the people that you work with logistically, if you notice there's a strong emotion, and it could be what you'd call positive or negative. They could be passionate and excited. That's still something that you want to lean in and talk about and address. Their passion, their excitement, their joy with this aspect of their job. But then there's the other shoe, which is you notice someone is more withdrawn, or they have less energy, or they express resentment or frustration or anger, if there's a strong preference or emotion or opinion that's related to some aspect of their job or accountability, that's the third thing that you want to be really aware of, not ignore, don't step over it, lean into that as a leader, as a head coach, as a program manager, as a general manager. If you notice there's any strong feelings towards any aspects of your business, explore those, seek those out. Do not ignore those because they could potentially be landmines. And the last thing I'll say here is, if there's any combination of those three, each one in of itself is like its own whole world to address. But if there's like a combination of like 1 and 2, God forbid 3 of those things, that is your indication that you've really got to step in that area and do something right now about it if there's multiple of those categories hitting.
And when I learned these things as a leader, I also had to learn a sort of like secret last thing. And that last thing was that you touched on it a bit. It's that when you make a decision, it doesn't have to be like full alignment, is what you said. I would phrase it as like, your business isn't a democratic constitution, right? Where it's not like a government. So if you have an important decision to make, do seek differing opinions. Do make sure that if someone has a strong emotion about it, that they're, heard and left, seen, acknowledged. But like, then when it comes time to make the decision, you take that feedback and then you still make the decision as the leader. So like, waiting for consensus might really actually slow you down. But if you take those key bits of insight from those 3 categories of communication and feedback and intelligence gathering that Chris just laid out, and then you and your leadership team make the decision, don't sit around for it to be like a democratic resolution. You need speed, and you need like a strong leader to actually like say, we're going this way. Even though there might be some differing opinions, at least you heard them out, and maybe you adjusted your approach a bit too, but someone still has to make that decision, and then the business moves forward. That was the thing that I needed to learn after I learned those 3 things that you just spoke to, because I found myself just like, not everyone on the team will learn those communication skills. And so when you have some people on the team who don't have like the full breadth of the insight at the issue you're trying to solve, or the decision you're trying to make right now, they don't have the full context. They don't really have like the ability to like make the decision on their own. But if you are saying like, okay, I have to make sure everyone is a yes, you're going to keep yourself stuck for probably way longer. So these tools are useful in team alignment and faster decision making too.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And that actually is like the perfect segue into the next part of the communication as well, which is because Jimmy's pointing to, you are doing data collection, you are investing in the opinions of your employees, but at the end of the day, as Jimmy's saying, it is not a democratic process. You're running the business. You have a strategic vision of how the business should be operating, and you've got to stick to that and make sometimes difficult decisions that not everyone will agree with. And that being said as well, in every single leadership position that I've worked with and interacted with, both within our companies and also within consulting, something that I come across so often is this. It's not necessarily conflict avoidance. For some people it is, but it's more so like an uncertainty about conflict, and like an unwillingness to engage in conflict. And have those tough conversations that you need to have, the radical and invigorating candor that you need to have a culture of excellence where everyone's doing what they said they would do when they said they would do it, so you can really count on that. And so this next tip is really critical. It's something I've worked on with myself a lot. It's something I've worked on with every leader within our own company, and also with the other companies that I'm working with as a consultant right now. And that is the ability to make an effective correction with someone in a way that doesn't leave them punished or diminished or left feeling, invalidated in some way, but they actually are effectively corrected. And what I mean by that is you're correcting them in a way where they not only are taking the actions that you want them to take now in their accountability, but they're doing it inside of the context you want them to do it in. So, for example, if I have a coach that's showing up late, which is something that every business deals with, is timeliness. If I have a coach that's showing up late, and I'm a general manager who may be uncertain about how to handle conflict or about how to lean into that, I may have a couple of different options. My first option may be, man, I'm going to like just briefly mention this to them and like hope that they really get that this is important, and then it's, they just keep showing up late, but like, I'm just going to keep briefly mentioning it. Yeah. Jimmy can relate to this. The second option, and I will see a lot of people default to this now. They're like, oh, I can't do that. I actually have to have people show up on time. Let me default to now a performance improvement plan, or like a write-up, or like an immediate disciplinary action is taken where they just clearly lay out the policy and they discipline the person. So they're kind of stuck between like, I'm being nice or I'm being really aggressive, right? And kind of just like immediately disciplinary action is involved. So here's the tip. Here's the middle ground. If you find yourself in either of the categories that I just said, the middle ground is knowing what it is that you are standing for as a leader, specifically in the culture that you're creating in your business. So you can take this, any situation, any issue that comes up in your business, you can just look at it through this lens. Check this out. My coach is showing up late. Okay, there's the issue. Now, we just looked at that from the default lens earlier. Now let's look at it from, what am I standing for? Well, I'm standing for a community that has reliable coaches. That's one thing I'm standing for. Okay, so that's what I'm standing for my community. What am I standing for this coach? I'm standing for that this coach develops the skills that are required to be where they said they would be when they said they would be there. And that is an important skill that they will use for the rest of their life. I'm standing for that coach having that as their general manager. What am I standing for them as their students? Okay, I'm standing for that their students has a coach that's prepared and ready and on time and has a lesson plan. Now I can approach that coach from what I'm standing for the community, what I'm standing for them, what I'm standing for their students, and it's all inside of addressing that aspect that is not workable in their accountability. And I can do that in anything, whether it's their timeliness, whether it's how we speak to each other. I can stand for anything rather than standing against their action or how they're showing up or their behavior. And so that's a little contextual reframing that will have you have the ability to easily approach those conversations. You'll approach those conversations so much more confidently, knowing what you're standing for.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And especially when you phrase it from like, here's what you get out of this, dear coach. Here's what you're giving the community when you just show up on time, dear coach. Like it becomes this thing that they then get to have and they then get to give to other people, like the community, the students, the parents. And you can kind of make it even be like their idea. Like what's the best way to make someone execute on something? Like have them think that it's their idea and they're stoked about it. Then they'll absolutely do it. So if you can bring them to that, like if you can just show up on time, this is the result. You become a person who is X for these students, become a person who is X for these people, and get them to agree, right? Get them to buy it in, get them to be like, I want to be that for these people. And like maybe even stop talking and like stare at them and like wait for them to reply. Like, don't you want this for them? Moment of silence. And they'll be like, yeah, right? And then if it happens again, you can stand on that previous conversation and be like, dude, I thought that when we had that conversation, you wanted to take it from there and you wanted to be this for the students. So like, what is it for you? Now that you are not standing for your students, like, why are you showing up late a second time? and maybe there's a reply, like their car broke down again, like it's always the car, whatever it is. But then it's not about like, I am mad at you as a manager. It's that like, we're both, I thought, standing for this thing. So like, let's actually solve the problem, or like, do you really belong here? And then we can go to the PIP, and then we can go to like write-ups and stuff, because you kind of have to as an employer. But yeah, starting from there, like what you just said, brings it as like we're standing shoulder to shoulder, looking at the problem of that this person is late in this example. It could be anything. We're standing shoulder to shoulder, looking at it together for the sake of what we're standing for. And then, we can have authentic results together, instead of I'm just managing you and it's painful for both of us.
Oh, so well said. And I love how you created that in the conversations. You're literally laying a foundation that you can then refer to with them. And it's their buy-in, and it's their creation of the accountability. They're saying, this is who I am for you. This is who I am for the community. This is how I'm going to show up for the gym. Now, for a general manager, I say that a general manager is responsible for two things: driving growth of the gym and driving culture of the gym. And so when we're talking about driving culture, like how to do that, we're talking about what are the behaviors that everybody is taking, and how to I effectively have my whole group of people take these same actions and behave this certain way. And you do that by having these types of conversations. So if you're not having these types of conversations in your gym, I could assert you're not driving culture. You may have a culture, and you always have a culture, but are you driving it specifically in a direction towards a designated place where when a person walks into that gym, they're going to get someone that behaves and acts a certain way. They show up on time, they're kind, they relate to themselves as experts. There's not any hidden or uncommunicated resentments about their job. They love being there. So if you want that kind of environment, you've got to get interested in this. And here's another pro tip for getting that kind of environment. As a general manager, and Jimmy has this, I have this, you have to begin developing this sixth sense for when problems are beginning to arise in communication. And that is a whole world that you don't want to step over. You cannot assume as a leader, and we know this at this point, having been in business for as many years as we have, you cannot assume that people are always going to communicate their problems to you. You actually want to assume the opposite, that there are many things that they are tolerating about their position, or things that they believe are unworkable that they aren't communicating to you, and they're just sitting on them, and it's causing these issues that will later become exacerbated, later blow up in unprecedented ways. When you don't lean into these little things, you trade, I'm not going to experience this short-term discomfort right now. You trade that short-term discomfort for a long-term dysfunction. So as a general manager and as a leader, you want to get really good at sensing when stuff is breaking down. And one of the first ways that you can identify that is if you can tell that people begin to disengage from your conversations. Okay? So they either physically or emotionally withdraw. You can tell someone that either had excitement or passion or some sort of alacrity and joy and energy about them. You can tell if they begin to withdraw either physically or emotionally from you in a conversation. That's something to address for sure. Anything on that?
Yeah, knowing how some people will react to maybe feeling overwhelmed or feeling out of alignment, without naming any specific people, of course, in our company, we know that we have one person who is a critical person who, when they're overwhelmed, maybe they just totally recluse, right? But this is tricky. We have a different person also in charge of a lot, that person will kind of do the opposite. They'll be like very in communication with you when they're overwhelmed. And if that person is like radio silence, you actually know that they're good, they're golden, right? So it's important to know whom on your staff, whom in your leadership team, how do they communicate when they're overwhelmed? How do they communicate when they have resentment, either at you or at someone else? Like, how are those little mannerisms changing? And this here, I'm specifically coloring in that sixth sense for what is happening in the communication, what is happening in the culture. If you can understand what people tend to do when they are in these different states of being, in these operating states of being, and you know their tendencies, that is your sixth sense. You can just watch them and you can just listen to their communication flows and just literally observe what's happening. And then if you just connect those dots, right? You just have an understanding of like mine to your relationship. What happens when you're peeved at me? What happens when you're stoked at me, and vice versa? And then you take action to investigate, have radical and sincere candor, which candor to be defined as just like direct communication, right? I'm going to be candid with you and I'm just going to say what the issue is right out. Like, this is the issue. You're looking at it. We're looking at it. And then we resolve it. After you have that sixth sense, you jump into those conversations and you resolve it.
Yeah, super well said. And you've got to know your team, and you have to know exactly, like Jimmy's saying, how they either engage with you or what they look like when they're disengaged. So that's the first key piece here, is noticing any sort of disengagement, and then not just noticing it, but speaking to it, saying something about it. Hey, I noticed you got a little more disengaged here. Or, yo, Jimmy, like usually you call me when you're really excited. I haven't gotten a call in a few days. Like, is everything okay? So just knowing your team and knowing their behavior and when they begin to disengage or behave in a way that indicates that they're overwhelmed, so important you actually do something about that. Now, Jimmy also touched on radical candor, which brings me to the second really key point for noticing that things are starting to break down, and that's downplaying. If you notice, for us in our company, we've inspired a culture of radical candor where we really say what there is to say in consideration of the other person, but we say what there is to say. We talk about performance. We talk about how people are late to meetings or on time, and we talk about why all the time. We're constantly sharing with each other how our actions impact each other. Now, if I noticed that there was any downplaying going on, how that would show up is if I notice radical candor is distinctly missing. How you notice that is with watered down responses. So if Jimmy came to me and said, what do you think about this new policy change? And I said something to the effect of, well, whatever you say, you're the boss. That would probably be some sort of indication for Jimmy that radical candor is missing. Okay, I've got some sort of thing I want to say about it, but for one reason or another, I'm not. Because I just gave this kind of watered down response. I downplayed how I actually thought about it, what I actually felt about it. And so in order to recognize this is why I call it a sixth sense. You have to get a sense for if the feedback that you're getting is genuine. And if you're not getting genuine feedback, that's a whole world in of itself. There's a whole world that, as a mentor, I go through with a person to determine, why is it that people aren't telling you what there is to say? Why aren't you the person that they're going to? Are they going to someone else? Is there a culture of gossip within your company? Are you not related to, as a leader, that is safe, that is going to hear their concerns as valid and then actually do something about it? So you can examine these different things, but man, if you notice that there's downplaying happening, that's the other critical aspect that you notice when things are starting to take a turn for the worst.
So what are some like specific tactics we have? Let's say exactly that happened. Chris, what do you think about my new policy? And you said, whatever works for you, man. You're the boss. you know, like if you don't know what to do with that, you kind of then are just like, yeah, I'm the boss, and then you take it, and then that person's resentful. Probably have an initiative or a new policy that like isn't actually fleshed out because clearly it doesn't work on some level, but I didn't get that feedback, so I can't flesh it out. So what do you do about that? And there's two sides of this coin. On one half is like, how did they respond? We'll talk about that. But the first one is how did you ask the question, right? So if you go up and I say, Chris, this is my new policy, what do you think about it? You know, you might actually present it as a collaborative experience. So Chris, I'm trying to solve this problem, right? So I'm talking about my result that I want is this problem being resolved. How do you see like this being resolved? What things do you see are in the way or are causing this issue to keep happening? You know, and then get some feedback. Maybe even say like, I'm thinking of solving this problem this way. How would you do that? You know, or do you have any feedback on that? And the way that you ask that question isn't so much like, here it is, say yes, please. Now it's like a collaborative experience, right? So that's what you can do as the person in the powerful position, because there's always a power dynamic somewhere happening. If you just phrase your question more collaboratively, you can get some better responses. A tip on that tip is sometimes the person you ask for feedback from, they give you like that first round reply of like, oh, it's great, I have nothing to add, right? I see this a lot when gym owners ask their clients about feedback, like what could be better about the gym? And they say, oh, everything's great, right? And this can happen from manager to employee or whatever. And so when that happens, just ask again. Be like, I'm glad you think it's great, and I'd like to make it even better. So what really do you see? Like, what would need to be true for you to take it to the next level? You know, you just ask it differently. And then, of course, that first side of the coin I said is like their reply. So if Chris was like, whatever works, man, you're the boss. You might just be like, sure, but I want to know what you think because like I value you because XYZ, like acknowledge their genuine implication and experience and way to contribute. Give them that you see that they can contribute right now. Give that to them and then re-invite them. So those two methods can also give you some just more complete feedback.
Dude, super well said. And what's really funny about this podcast that's happening right now is I didn't go over my topics with Jimmy in depth before this, and he's naturally creating the next big piece of this conversation, which is just a succinct point to get, which is be aware of when you're approaching your employees, whether or not you're dominating them. Like Jimmy said, you already are really in a power position if you are in a leadership position. And so how you approach your employees is everything. It dictates whether or not they truly experience it as a collaborative process and whether or not it actually is a collaborative process or whether you've just made a decision and you're going in to check off the box of getting feedback. People can tell that you're not genuinely interested in what they have to say. And so check yourself as a leader, be aware of whether or not you are dominating the conversation, either in how you're approaching them or in how you're presenting the topic. That's so key. So that's a self-check as a leader. Hey, hot tip, don't dominate. And you can make the assumption you are dominating and ask yourself the question, how do I approach this conversation in a way that's collaborative, in a way that inspires partnership? And if you just ask yourself that question, you'd be astounded at the type of results that you can create. So wrapping this up, the third way that you can really tell that conversations are beginning to fall apart somewhere in a dynamic between you and another person and you want to address it, the third final way here is if you notice, and I'm going to say this in a couple different ways. If you notice that the topic changes, so if there's a sensitive issue within your gym, such as like a pay raise or a new policy or a specific community member or employee that there's something to resolve with them, and you notice with this person, the topic changes. The subject changes. And let me get a little more specific about that. This is what I meant by, I'll say this a few different ways. specifically looking for that it's not complete. There's you cannot see as a leader that this is going to get complete. You don't see the actions that are being taken to have this be complete. So for just like an example, let's say there was a community member that made someone uncomfortable and no one wanted to address it with them. I went up to the general manager and said, hey, I got a complaint that this specific community member is making other people uncomfortable. That general manager says, hey, no worries, I've got it handled. Okay, well, right away, as a leader, I've got it handled. Maybe I'm confident in that. Hey, I've got it handled. Maybe I'm confident in that. They have a strong track record of just handling stuff. Cool. Maybe I can just totally trust that. Awesome. However, as a leader, if I'm like, man, that's a nuanced situation. This community member that is making other people uncomfortable, they're the husband of one of my coaches or something like that. Maybe it's nuanced. Maybe I don't see. I'm like, what do you mean you have it handled? Investigate. If you don't see how it would be complete. And that goes for nuanced cultural issues, that goes for systems and procedures, generating reports, being at the source of what's happening within a gym or for an event or for a class or what's happening with someone's pay raise structure. It could be anything. If you ask the question and you notice, wow, the person that should be responsible for that doesn't have a strong response to this, that it's not complete over there where they are, do not step over that. Do not ignore that. Lean into that so that you're sure that they are sure. And if you just do that, if you create certainty where you are uncertain with the people that you are managing, you will uncover every hole within your business. Every hole within your business.
Yeah, absolutely. So communication as a function of managing your team, as a function of growing your business. When does all of this stuff become like very critical, right? And this is a scaling issue. The more people you have, the more important it is that you're great at communication, that you're great at coaching people to get better at communication, that when you hire people, you're assessing their ability to communicate, their ability to hear feedback and react and improve based on the feedback. So if you're listening to this and you're a parkour gym owner and you maybe have a small handful of coaches, and maybe you don't have like a management layer, it's just you and your team, sure, this is important. But as you start to grow, as you add a general manager, as you add a head coach, like especially as you have 2 locations, this like the importance of this multiplies by like 100x once you have 2 locations. You know, the more you grow, the more people you'll need to help manage that. The more you'll watch your position move from I'm like the head coach, I'm the dude working the front desk at this parkour gym. That'll shift into I am a mentor for my team. I am a coach for my team. And the only way to really show up in reality there is through your communication to them. You know, your digital communication, your in-person communication, even your body language, and your ability to assess their communication. So as your gym grows, you shift into being a mentor for your team, and this becomes more and more important. So just wanted to create that, like, where in my business journey does this become important? It's important right now, and it only gets more important. It only scales from there.
Yeah, big time. And as you scale your communication skills, you will be able to take on bigger problems. And when you become more effective at tackling the problems within your team not only will become more effective employees, they literally will become happier humans. It's proven that your relationship with your manager, the person that directly oversees you and your work, has more to say about your mental health than even your spouse or medical professionals around you. So it's something to take you should have a high regard for how you relate to your employees. Now, we touched on something earlier that I'm going to close this conversation with, and then direct you all to a resource so that you can find out more about this. So earlier, Jimmy and I touched on the importance of making sure that you're not dominating your employees. And the fact of the matter is, you will have strong opinions as a manager, and you will have to have those strong opinions and make strong decisions as a manager. So I'm going to leave you with 3 really critical tips, and then a resource to equip you with further knowledge down the line. So those 3 tips are: watch for signs that you're pushing too hard with your employees. Okay, you can totally have a vision and a direction and an idea of where things are going, but just watch for, am I immediately jumping to reprimandation, or am I including my employees in what that vision is? Am I actively creating that context with them? That approach that Jimmy talked about is super critical. Second key tip is soften your delivery, but not your message. You know what you're standing for. You have to have employees that show up on time. You have to have employees that clean the equipment. You have to have employees that do everything that's listed in their job description. So when you are leaning into these tougher conversations, you don't ever want to water down the message. Sometimes you just need to soften the way that you're delivering it, but make sure that message stays very strong. What you're standing for stays very strong. And the last tip here is actively, and I love this about Jimmy, actually, this is one of my favorite things about Jimmy as a leader, is actively encourage other people to challenge your thinking. When you understand what it is that you're standing for as a leader within your space, either as a general manager and a business owner, a head coach, when you know why you're having this tough conversation, you can encourage people to seek it out with you and to really get curious, about why it is that you're having that conversation with them, and ask them, invite them to poke holes in it. Do you have any questions about this? Do you have any concerns about this? Do you have any, yeah, but what about this, about what I'm saying? Do you have any, yeah, but what if this happens? And ask for that, encourage that, show people that you really have thought about why it is that you're saying what you're saying, and it gives you the opportunity to re-clarify your intentions and also open the floor to genuine concern that other people may have about anything that you're doing within your business.
Okay, so if you want more on this, we have a full blog article on our website. So motionmentors.org, check out the blog. Depending on when you're seeing this, it'll be towards the top or not. And if you didn't already know, at motionmentors.org, we have tons of free resources for parkour business owners. So if you're a parkour gym owner, you sell t-shirts, you have a media company, it's tons and tons of free content to help you guys build your business, learn how to become a great leader, do sales, do marketing, figure out your product, and kind of go from there. Chris, you mentioned a few times being a consultant for other businesses. And what that is we're referring to other parkour gyms who literally have us show up and help them train their staff. We will help them train their general managers, their head coach, their insert name of position here. And a lot of times it is exactly what we're talking about right here. Sometimes it's exactly this. Sometimes it's how do we fill this event coming up? Sometimes it's like, how do we hire or fire someone? Sometimes it's how do we just grow our gym to the next level, and what is in the way of that? So if this was valuable to you, if any of that is valuable to you, step 1, go to our blog, implement as much of that free stuff as you can. What I want, the reason why I'm making so much of this free is so that you do implement as much as you can, so that you grow your business as much as you can, so that you create the cash first to then, if you want, come and hire me and Chris to basically be like co-pilot CEO, co-pilot COO, and help you get to your next level. And if you can do that on cash that you've already generated from our free content, that's a triple win-win-win right there. Okay, motionmentors.org. Chris, thanks for the time talking about this. I love the article. Chris put this one together. That's his wheelhouse of expertise for sure. Okay, thank you, everybody. See ya.